Hello, this is Braasch. Welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to talk about the Great Racist Scare of 2018, otherwise known as the Living While Black movement, which is also otherwise known as the reason why social justice movements, including the Me Too and Time's Up movements, will either demand due process or become defunct, as the Living While Black movement now is. Any social justice movement worth its salt will demand due process. Without due process, a social justice movement will be usurped by con artists and frauds out to make a cheap and quick buck at the expense of an innocent person's life. It is only a matter of time. This is what happened to the Living While Black movement. This is why I now refer to it as the Great Racist Scare of 2018, because it bears so many of the hallmarks of the Red Scare of McCarthyism. Instead of seeing commies everywhere in 2018, we saw racists everywhere, even in the form of a lifelong human and civil rights attorney activist. Anyone could be a racist, just like anyone could have been a commie in the 50s. Just like during the McCarthy era of the 1950s, my attackers called for congressional hearings to address the Living While Black incidents. I was just waiting to have to justify my single word choices in decade-old blog posts to Congress. Can you imagine? I think we need congressional hearings on race and hate crime hoaxes. It blows the mind, but New York State Senator Jesse Hamilton actually cited me as inspiration for his proposed hate crime legislation. I will do an entire video or series of videos on how what was done to me is everything that is wrong with hate crime legislation. We are devolving into an Iron Curtain society of the Soviet Union era, wherein all of the citizens are complicit, making false accusations against one another to deflect any blame from themselves, getting one another killed to save one's own skin. You can't be the accused if you're the accuser, right? This is made possible by the roving online mobs of moral outrage warriors, ready to destroy innocent lives and drive people to suicide at the least provocation or mere accusation. The Iron Curtain societies required truth and reconciliation committees to help them heal after generations of terrorizing one another. Will we? After the infamous Starbucks incident, every grifter and charlatan, especially on college campuses, saw an opportunity for moral outrage industry profit and gain and fame. They were also inspired by the Believe Women and Believe Survivors campaigns of the Me Too and Time's Up movements. An accusation of sexual harassment is a condemnation of the accused sexual harasser. Likewise, in the context of the Living While Black movement, an accusation of racial harassment is a condemnation of the accused racial harasser. This is the bedrock of intersectional feminism and far-left ideological fascism. There are never false accusations of racism. If a black person says you're racist, then you are. If you attempt to defend yourself against a false accusation of racism, this is racism, because you are perpetuating the oppressive status quo system of institutionalized racism. If you make a demand for due process, this is racism, because you are perpetuating the oppressive status quo system of institutionalized racism. But it's important to choose one's victims wisely. And the con artists and civil rights frauds of the now defunct Living While Black movement chose particularly well. They chose largely to accuse middle-aged or older, lower-class white women with obvious or seeming mental health disabilities. Because who could care about poor old crazy white trash women, right? And they don't have the resources typically to defend themselves or to sue for defamation. The Living While Black movement was largely turned into a blood sport of trying to get older, lower-class white women with mental health disabilities killed. And everyone joined in on the fun. There was much money and mirth to be had at the expense of these innocent victims. The press had a field day, berating these women as evil, racist monsters, the scourge of society, the reason we can't have nice things. They used their lives as piñatas, tearing them to shreds for the merriment of the masses. Late-night talk show hosts and comics joined in on the fun, and every intersectional feminist pundit exploited the destruction of these innocent women's lives for career advancement and feigned moral and intellectual authority. Many, and I'm going to go ahead and say most, of these living while black cases turned out to be frauds and even race and hate crime hoaxes. My case was an actual hate crime hoax. It seems now that the woman in Portland who was targeted for having called the parking authority on an illegally parked vehicle before she had even seen the owners was the victim of a race hoax. It seems now that the woman in the Chipotle who was fired and subsequently rehired was also the victim of a race hoax. It seems now that the woman at Smith College who was cleared of any wrongdoing by the college's internal investigation was the victim of a fraud, or at least an overeager college campus activist who saw a chance at civil rights icon cum victimhood status and feigned moral authority. It seems now that the lecturer at UT San Antonio, who was cleared of racism by the university's internal investigation, was also the victim of overeager college campus activists who saw a chance at their 15 minutes of internet fame. It also seems now that the most recent incident of a woman in a dog park, nicknamed Dog Park Diane, was also the victim of someone who saw a chance to grab their 15 minutes of internet fame. I hope she's doing okay. Her case was relatively mild because the Living While Black movement is in its death throes, but I'm sure that she was still extremely upset. And some of the other incidents are also highly suspect, ostensibly involving the exploitation of women with mental health disabilities or situations wherein the actual rather anodyne facts of the matter were grossly skewed to make what happened seem like an incendiary instance of racism. The Living While Black con artists and frauds should be ashamed of themselves. Instead of talking about Stephon Clark, people were talking about Dog Park Diane. The Living While Black charlatans, including the press and pundits of the moral outrage industry, destroyed the Living While Black movement. They have only themselves to blame for having destroyed it. I was trying to protect it. I only spoke out after it was already clear to me that it had been destroyed by civil rights frauds, like my attackers. These civil rights frauds, like my attackers, have done a gross disservice to the Black social justice movement in the U.S. and around the world, just like Jussie Smollett allegedly did. 2018 will go down in history as a moment of insanity, as a moral panic, a moment of mass racial hysteria targeted largely against innocent members of a vulnerable population, just like the Red Scare of the McCarthy era of the 1950s. Thank you for spending this time with me.